Every day, tens of thousands of vehicles head toward the Hudson River and simply disappear beneath it. A little more than a mile later, those same vehicles surface, either in lower Manhattan or over in New Jersey, passing more than 100 feet below the water's surface. The crossing takes only a few minutes. Yet for the engineers who brought this dream to life, it was a project so demanding that not all of them lived to see it open. Most drivers never really give it much thought, but this tunnel is a vital link to New York City, carrying millions annually under one of the busiest shipping channels in the world. And it was the first of its kind to carry automobile traffic underwater when it opened in 1927. This tunnel introduced technologies and safety systems that would become the blueprint for underwater road tunnels around the world. This is engineering the impossible. The Holland Tunnel. Let's go beyond the exit. Welcome to Beyond the Exit. My name is Scott, and this is a place where we love to tell the stories of the roads that move us. Today, that road leads us under the Hudson River and through the Holland Tunnel. It's a crossing that feels fairly routine now, but when it was built, it was anything but. And it was created to solve a unique problem for New York, one that came into sharp focus during a single, unforgiving winter. The Big Freeze. For 3 centuries, the Hudson River was New York's greatest strength, a massive commercial artery that connected the city to the oceans of the world, making Manhattan one of the busiest ports on the planet. But for the people living on the island, the same river served as a wall. While the Hudson served the world's ships, it severed the city's supply lines. There was no land route from the west. Every train carrying coal, food, or freight stopped in New Jersey, forcing the cargo onto a chaotic fleet of ferries for the final mile. This separation had stretched on for years amid political gridlock, and there were no signs of a quick resolution in sight. So the city was left with a system that worked only when the river allowed it. In the winter of 1917, the river stopped cooperating. That year, temperatures plunged so deeply that the Hudson froze into jagged sheets of ice, totally immobilizing the ferry system as they were trapped in their slips. The shipping lane that made the city wealthy was now strangling it. Mountains of coal sat on the New Jersey shoreline, while Manhattan froze. To make matters worse, the city was in a food shortage as well, all while less than a mile away, food rotted on the docks. But that crisis changed the equation. That winter finally broke the political gridlock with the mandate for a permanent crossing. Now undeniable, the only decision left was whether to climb over the river or dig under it. The big decision. The ice blockade forced the two states to the table. And in 1919, New York and New Jersey finally merged their efforts into a joint commission, a unified body with a single mandate to build a crossing that could survive the winter. In early 20th century engineering terms, that likely meant building a bridge. In the era of steel giants, the commission was immediately drawn to the vision of Gustav Lindenthal, already a legendary bridge builder. He was responsible for the Hell's Gate Bridge across the East River. His proposal was to build the North River Bridge at 57th Street, a true colossus with towers taller than the Woolworth Building, the world's record holder at the time. The design called for multiple lanes for automobiles and a second deck for train traffic, and it would be magnificent, a tremendous monument for a monumental city. Unfortunately, it found itself doomed from the beginning. The War Department vetoed the plan entirely, fearing the massive bridge would trap battleships in the harbor. They specified a 200-foot clearance from the water's surface. That additional height meant additional cost and longer approach ramps. The cost of buying midtown real estate for the ramps was both astronomical and, to most owners, unacceptable. Needless to say, the bridge concept was scuttled. The Joint Commission found itself needing another option, and needing it quickly. Enter Clifford Milburn Holland, a 36-year-old engineer who had spent his career in the muddy, pressurized darkness of the city's subway tunnels. Holland argued that the Hudson could be conquered from below, which was quite risky, to be honest. By choosing the tunnel, Holland was accepting a challenge that no engineer had ever faced. Not that it would be the first tunnel built under the Hudson River. In fact, there were already two. but they were designed for trains. What Holland was proposing would be the world's first subaqueous automobile tunnel. Hugely different. And here's why. Trains, though much larger, generally just have a single emission point, a very large one. Now, those tunnels are built with much tighter tolerances than today's automobile tunnels, so the train pretty much pulls its own draft along with it. Not to mention, there aren't hundreds of trains running through the tunnel at the same time. However, thousands of cars idling in a confined tube was a recipe for disaster, as it would not take long to generate lethal levels of carbon monoxide. However, the Commission had little choice in this big decision than to go with Holland's proposal. There was no doubt that Holland could dig a hole under the river for drivers to enter into. The real question was whether he could build a machine that would keep them alive until they got to the other side. The mother of invention. As the design phase began, Holland faced an enemy that no amount of dynamite could defeat: the air itself. He and his chief designer, Ollie Singstead, realized that to build the structure, they first had to solve that physiological riddle. You see, it wasn't just about how much air was needed, but to determine exactly how much poison a human body could absorb and survive. Even by the 1920s, that number wasn't well known. So they launched one of the most comprehensive research programs in civil engineering history. Under the supervision of Dr. Yandell Henderson, staff volunteers stepped into gas-tight chambers sealed with known concentrations of carbon monoxide. Shockingly, for up to an hour at a time, these human guinea pigs sat in poisoned air, enduring headaches, nausea, and slowing of their blood's ability to carry oxygen. Their suffering yielded the standard of ventilation, a conclusion that states that a human body could tolerate 4 parts of carbon monoxide per 10,000 parts of air without collapsing. With this in hand, the problem moved away from biology and on to mechanics. Blowing air from one end of the mile-long tube to the other was simply impossible. The velocity required to clear the smoke would create hurricane-force winds inside the tunnel. Instead, Singstead designed what was called transverse ventilation, a system that treated the tunnel like a living lung. The roadway itself was floating on a cushion of fresh air, forced into the massive duct placed below the floor and released through expansion slots at the curb level. As the hot, toxic exhaust rose from the automobiles, it was immediately drawn into the suction ports in the ceiling and pulled out through a separate overhead duct. So the air didn't travel miles down the tube, it traveled just a few feet vertically. It was basically a respiratory system made of concrete, capable of completely replacing the air in the tunnel every 90 seconds. It was a true triumph on paper, but it was one battle in a war that would move now into the mud. Under pressure. With the ventilation problem solved, construction began in earnest. Digging these twin tunnels through the soft silt of the Hudson required a massive mechanical beast to lead the way. Crews utilized a great head shield, a 400-ton steel cylinder that acted as both a submarine and a cookie cutter at the same time, driven forward by powerful hydraulic jacks that kicked off the completed tunnel rings behind it. The shield moved blindly through the riverbed. Inside this steel cocoon, the sandhogs, as they were called, dug out the muck and bolted together the heavy cast iron segments inch by inch. But to keep the river from flooding this open wound created by the head shield, the tunnels were pressurized with compressed air, about 45 psi, creating a massive invisible wall force that held back millions of tons of water and silt pressing down from above. This atmosphere made the site a unique fusion of heavy industry and emergency medicine. Under the guidance of Dr. Edward Levy, the project implemented rigorous protocols to prevent the bends, the crippling formation of nitrogen bubbles in the bloodstream caused by rapid decompression. To combat this, the tunnel entrances were equipped with medical locks, basically giant airlocks. Here, the physiology of the workforce was monitored closely with the decompression process. For the sandhogs, the tunnel was a place where the air itself was a heavy physical weight. But leading that subterranean army was Clifford Holland himself. In fact, by this time, the press already had another nickname for him, the Head Mole. You see, Holland didn't sit behind a desk in Manhattan. He spent his days in the same compressed air atmosphere, subjecting his own body to the punishing cycles of compression and decompression, right alongside his men, a move that definitely gained their respect. However, what many did not know was that inside Clifford Holland was a ticking time bomb, his heart. Despite a history of heart weakness, he refused to detach himself from the work. Daily, he absorbed the physical punishment of the tunnel. Added to this was also the political pressure from the surface to keep the project on time and within budget. However, the river would become his most volatile adversary. In April of 1924, the delicate balance between the compressed air inside the tunnel and the river bottom outside gave way, erupting in an air geyser on the Hudson. Barges were frantically brought in to do a clay blanketing maneuver, dumping thousands of tons of silt and material directly into the breach point. That gamble worked, and even though the river's breach could be sealed with mud, the stress of the disaster was tearing open fissures in the man leading the charge. The first one through. The tunnel had survived the blowout. Clifford Holland would not be so lucky. Having survived the near collapse of his tunnel, he found himself unable to hold up against the crushing psychological weight of the project itself. For Clifford Holland, the strain of managing the impossible eventually became too much. In October 1924, suffering from what doctors termed nervous exhaustion, he was sent away to a sanatorium to rest and to heal. Unfortunately, the damage was already done. On October 27th, just 2 days before the tunnel headings were scheduled to meet beneath the river, his heart gave out. He was 41 years old. When the final blasts were fired and the two tubes connected in the dark, the two men on either side vigorously shook each other's hand. Then, before anyone crossed through, two items were exchanged. One from the New Jersey side to the New York side, a telegram addressed to Clifford Holland's widow, sharing the condolences from the New Jersey side. The other, a single photograph of Clifford Holland himself, symbolically giving him the honor of being the first one to pass through. The burden of command fell to Holland's loyal deputy, Milton Freeman. Freeman was a brilliant engineer who had stood by Holland's side from the beginning, but he inherited a grieving organization and a project entering its most critical phase. And as they would find, the tunnel was not done taking its toll. Freeman threw himself into the work with a desperate intensity, shouldering the same pressures that Holland had dealt with, and ignoring his own failing health to honor his friend's legacy. That intensity was too great for him as well. In March 1925, less than 5 months after taking the helm, Milton Freeman died of pneumonia and heart failure, becoming the latest in a growing list of fatalities on the worksite, a list large enough that the press began calling it the Man-Eater. Since construction had begun, 13 workers had died from various industrial accidents. Now, it had also claimed the 2 engineers leading the way. But in spite of the horrible price paid, the project was finally pushed to completion by Ollie Singstead. Anatomy of the Tube. As Ollie Singstead picked up the mantle from his predecessors, there was still much work to be done. After the 2 shields finally met in the middle, the tunnel was technically open, but functionally useless. It was just a raw, leaking cast iron skeleton buried in the mud. Transforming this dark tube into a public highway required a construction effort just as complex as the digging itself. First, the structure had to be sealed. Crews injected massive amounts of grout behind the iron rings, filling the void between the metal and the riverbed to lock the tunnel in place and waterproof the skin. Then they lined the entire interior with concrete to protect the iron from corrosion and fire. But the biggest challenge was the geometry. A circular tube is perfect for resisting water pressure, but impossible for driving. To solve this, workers had to square the circle. They poured a massive concrete floor slab suspended midway up the tube. This created the flat roadway, but more importantly, it created the lungs of the system. The empty space left beneath the slab became the fresh air duct, while a suspended ceiling was installed above to create the exhaust port. They were effectively building a 3-story structure inside of a pipe. Air below, cars in the middle, and exhaust above. Once the concrete cured, the finishing touches were applied. The roadway, the electrical and telephone systems, and the iconic white tiles. By the time the work was completed, the raw industrial tube had been dressed in a clean, modern tuxedo, completely hiding the massive life support machinery that lay just inches above and below the drivers. On November 12, 1927, the Holland Tunnel opened to the public, officially dedicated to its designer. What the world saw was an amazing feat of civil engineering, but to those who had built it, it was a monument of a specific kind of sacrifice, sadly built by men who gave their lives to prove it could be done. The 24-hour operation. Today, the Holland Tunnel is more than a static tube of concrete. It's a complex industrial machine in a state of constant, aggressive maintenance. But to understand that machine, we have to take a look at the structure that lets it breathe. Rising like Art Deco fortresses are the four ventilation buildings, the silent lungs of the Hudson, from the New York Land Building to the riverbeds, standing like islands in the channel. These monoliths house 84 massive fans, performing a mechanical miracle every 90 seconds by replacing every cubic inch of air in the tube. This also isn't a standard highway operation. It's a sovereign domain of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. On the asphalt, the front line is held by the Tunnel and Bridge Agents, or TBAs. These agents are an elite hybrid of first responders, part Port Authority police, part firefighter, and part heavy recovery specialist. They are tasked with the responsibility of keeping this vital artery flowing. The tunnel also has a dual personality. By day, it moves thousands of passengers back and forth safely under the river, but at night the maintenance war begins. Part of that battle is against grime and salt. The tunnel is famous for its millions of white tiles. They serve a purpose in reflecting light. Psychologically, they help to fight driver claustrophobia, but that's all dependent on keeping them clean. And that fight is fought by custom-built washer trucks that scrub away exhaust while the city sleeps. Keeping these and all the other small tasks that must be accomplished in a facility this large on the back shift, so to speak, improves worker safety and traffic flow, all accomplished nearly seamlessly by a crew of just a few hundred. Because in a tunnel system that moves 30 to 40 million vehicles a year, no task that keeps it going can be considered small. After nearly 100 years, the Holland Tunnel doesn't simply endure, it adapts to the needs of everyday life and will continue to adapt into the future. To say it's monumental would be kind of an understatement, especially since this tunnel changed the way nearly all tunnels would be built in the future. But the problems that they solved here are truly a testament to the men who designed and built it, especially to the man whose name it bears, a man who literally gave his heart to the river while engineering the impossible. If you enjoyed the story of the Holland Tunnel, but you'd like to hear more about deeper facts behind this amazing structure, check out our newsletter, The Ledger. It's hosted on Substack, and I'll leave a link in the description below. Now, maybe you have a story that you'd like to share about it. If so, leave us a comment below. We try to answer each and every one of them. If you enjoyed our story, if you would right now, please press the like button or share it with a friend that might find it interesting. It helps us go so much further on YouTube. You know, we love telling stories at Beyond the Exit where the highway is the hero. If you're enjoying those stories too, why don't you consider joining our caravan and subscribing to the channel? We'd love to have you ride along. Now, there are a lot of other places you could travel to on this highway called YouTube, so we appreciate you going beyond the exit to spend time with us. As always, thanks so much for watching, and God bless.